I'm Verity Dunmore, 44, and I have spent 22 years in the Navy building and repairing the things nobody looks at. The pier, the water plant, the power, the roof over the room you are standing in. It is a trade whose entire measure of success is that you cannot tell anybody was ever there. And I made my peace with that a long time ago, or I thought I had. But when a captain in the foyer of a naval gala held out her coat without looking up and told me the coat check was that way, I found out that 22 years of not expecting to be seen had cost me something I had not been counting. Have you ever been sized up in a second and a half by somebody who never bothered to look at your face? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. There is a slab on the east side of the station that went in at 6:20 on a Tuesday morning in July, and I was standing on the edge of it in boots with a notebook in my hand, and I was happier than I have been in about 2 years. I will come back to the slab. It is the end of this, and it is also, in a way that will make sense later, the entire point of it. The trade first, because almost nobody knows what it is. I am a CB. That is the word people have heard, if they have heard anything, and what it actually means is the Naval Construction Force. And what I am specifically is an officer of the Civil Engineer Corps, which is a staff corps of about 1,200 people that most of the Navy could not describe if you asked them at gunpoint. We build things, we repair things. We put in the runway, the pier, the water plant, the power, the roof, the road, and the building the change of command is held in. We also, when it is required, do it in places where people are shooting, which is the part of the history that gets remembered, and which is about 4% of what the force actually does. The rest of it is a water main on a Tuesday. And the whole trade comes down to one sentence, which I have said to every junior officer I have ever had, and which is the truest thing I know about my own profession. Yeah, if we do it right, nobody can tell we were there. That is not a complaint. I want to be extremely clear about that at the start, because everything that follows can be read as a complaint if you are looking for one. And it is not. It is a description of the physics of the job. A building that works is a building nobody thinks about. Water that comes out of a tap is water that has never once been discussed. The only time anybody in the Navy thinks about my community is when something has failed, and the reason it failed is almost never us. I was commissioned in 2004. 22 years old, an engineering degree, in a course in Rhode Island that taught me contract law and construction management and how to stand in front of people who knew more than I did. Then a battalion. Here's the thing about a construction battalion that nobody outside understands. There are roughly 600 people in one, and about 580 of them know how to build something. And about 12 of them are officers, and the officers are the ones who do not. You arrive as an ensign. You are 24. You are in charge of a company of men and women who have been running excavators and pulling wire and welding since before you finish school. And the entire question of your career is decided in the first 4 months. And it is decided by whether you shut up. Some of them do not. I have watched 3 officers over 22 years arrive and start correcting people. And all 3 of them were technically right about something in the first fortnight, and all 3 of them were finished in that community by the end of the year. Nobody sabotaged them. The battalion simply routed around them the way water routes around a rock, and they spent 2 years signing things that had already been decided. I was lucky. I got a first-class petty officer called Lyle Ferreira in 2008. He was 31 then, he is 49 now, and he has been my command master chief twice. Which is a thing that almost never happens, and if I tell this story properly, he is in about a third of it. The first week, I signed a work package he had put in front of me. I read the cover, I signed it, and I handed it back, and I was proud of how fast I had done it. He did not take it. He said, "Ma'am, you can sign it or you can understand it." I would rather you understood it. Then he stood there. For a very long time, with the folder in my hand and the 2 of us in a plywood office with a window unit going, and I understood that I was going to read the whole thing. It took me 2 hours. There were 4 things wrong in it, all of them mine, and he knew about all 4 before he handed it over. That is the entire education. Everything I know I was taught by somebody who could have done my job and could not have my job, and my community is completely honest about that in a way I have not found anywhere else in the service. There is no pretending in a construction battalion. The work is either standing up or it is not. You cannot brief your way past a wall that is out of plumb and everybody on the site can see it, and that has a leveling effect on rank that I have never encountered anywhere else in 22 years. My father was a CB, Emmett Dunmore, 74 now, and he did 22 years and got out as a senior chief and has said approximately 2 sentences about it in my entire life. The first one he said when I was 9 and asked him what he did in the war. He said, "It is not a war story. We poured a runway." That is it. That is the whole answer. I asked follow-up questions the way children do, and he answered them all with facts about concrete, and I went away disappointed. And it took me about 20 years to understand that he had told me the truth, and that the truth was the runway. I have thought a great deal about why I went into this, and I have landed somewhere unflattering, which is that I did not choose it out of any calling. I chose it because it was the thing in my house that was never talked about, and I have a temperament that walks toward those. 22 years later, I am a commander with a battalion command behind me, and I am extremely good at this, and I have never in my career been asked about it by anybody outside my own community. Not once. Not at a party, not at a joint staff, not by a warfare officer at a table. I want to be accurate that this did not bother me. That is the part that becomes important later, and I did not see it coming at all. It did not bother me because I did not expect it. I had no standing expectation of being seen in the same way I have no standing expectation of the weather being any particular thing. And I had thought for 20 years that this made me healthy. It did not make me healthy, it made me convenient. But that is a conclusion from July, and in the ordinary course of things, this account starts in August of 2023 at 4 a.m. with a Category 4 crossing a naval station. The storm crossed on a Thursday night in August of 2023. By first light on the Friday, the station had lost about 90% of its roofs. The fuel pier was unusable. The water treatment plant was under 4 feet of water, and the power plant was running on emergency generation with 2 of 4 units down. 4,000 people lived and worked there. I had the battalion. I had taken command 13 months earlier, and I want to be honest that I had spent most of those 13 months on training pipelines and readiness reporting, which is what a battalion commander does in peacetime, and which is not what anybody imagines. Here is what the first 72 hours actually consist of. And it is not what people picture. It is not rescue. Nobody needed rescuing. It is assessment. The rescue happens before the storm, and it is called evacuation, and it is somebody else's job. By the time my community is standing on a station, the dangerous part is over, and what is left is a very large arithmetic problem with a clock on it. You walk the station with a clipboard. That is the entire first day. Every structure, every line, every run of buried pipe you cannot see. And you write down what you find, and the number you are producing is not a repair estimate. It is a triage order. Because you cannot do it all at once. There is a finite amount of labor and a finite amount of material, and both of them are already committed to something else. And every hour you spend on the wrong thing is an hour off the right thing. Everybody wanted the galley. I understand why. It is a visible building, it feeds people. And there is a very human logic that says fix the place people eat. We did the water plant. You cannot feed 4,000 people you cannot give a shower to. You cannot run a medical clinic without water or a laundry or a fire suppression system. And if the water plant stays down for 11 days, then in about 8 of them, you have a public health problem that costs you more than the storm did. I had that argument 4 times in the first week, twice with people senior to me. I won all 4, and I won them by being right and by having the numbers, and I want to record that not one of those 4 people has ever mentioned it again. That is not a grievance either. Being right in a room is a transaction that clears immediately and leaves no balance. You win, the decision changes, everybody moves on, and nobody carries the memory of it except the person who had to have the argument. The pier took 91 days. The power plant came back to full in 7 weeks, in stages, and the stages mattered because a hospital and a magazine and a data center do not tolerate the same interruptions, and you sequence for the least tolerant. The water plant was up in 9 days. That is fast. That is genuinely fast, and about 6 people on that station know it. Then the roofs, which is the long, unglamorous middle. 211 structures. You do temporary membrane first across everything, because the second storm is always coming. And then you go back and do permanent, and the going back and doing permanent is 9 months of the most boring work in the world, and it is where a reconstruction is actually won or lost. The temporary work is the part people photograph. Blue material stretched across a roofline is a good photograph, and it means the emergency is being handled. The permanent work is nobody's photograph. It is a crew on a roof in June with a heat index of 104, doing something that will look exactly like a roof. The community center was the 9th month. By the 9th month, the emergency is long over and the interest is gone. Nobody visits a reconstruction in the 9th month. There are no photographs and no distinguished visitors, and the work is exactly as hard as it was in the 2nd week. And morale in a battalion is decided entirely by what happens in months 7 through 11. I have the dates. I have the crew list. It was a company of 19 under a chief builder, and they took the roof, the structural repairs on the south wall, the electrical, and the interior, and it came in 11 days under. 2 of them fell out sick doing it. Heat in June, on a roof, both of them fine within a day, and both of their names are on a form I signed. I have never told anybody any of that. Not before May of this year. 11 months start to finish. August to July. And then in July of 2024, I stood on a platform in a hangar and read a set of orders out loud and handed the battalion to somebody else, and that was that. I stayed on the station. I went to a regimental staff job, which is a good job and which is mostly program management, and I have been doing it for 2 years. And here's the thing about reconstruction that I have never seen written down anywhere. There is no moment. There is no ribbon. There is no day when the station is declared fixed, because it does not work like that. What happens is that a building comes back online and people move into it, and then another one, and then another one. And about 14 months in, you notice that nobody is talking about the storm anymore. By 2026, the hurricane had become a date. People used it to fix other things in time. Before the storm, after the storm. My daughter was born the year of the storm. Nobody on that station in May of 2026 could have told you the name of the unit that put it back together, and I do not say that bitterly. I say it because it is a fact about how the trade works, and because I had made my peace with it in about 2009. In April, the wardroom asked me to be the guest of honor at their annual dinner. The president of the mess called me himself. He was pleasant about it. He said something about it being time somebody talked about the engineering side, which was well meant, and which I have turned over a few times since. I said yes. Then I spent 6 weeks regretting it. I wrote the speech 4 times. The first draft was policy. The second draft was funny, and I hated it by the 2nd page. The third draft was about my father, which was self-indulgent, and the 4th draft was so careful that it did not say anything at all. The problem is structural, and I could not solve it. A woman whose entire professional value is that you cannot tell she was there does not have a speech in her. The whole competence is the absence. By the Friday, I had a 4th draft in my inside pocket that I did not believe in, a duty day I could not get out of, and a dinner at 1900 that I had been trying to find a way out of for a month and a half. Friday the 22nd of May, 2026. At 1650, a transformer failed at the fuel pier. I want to be precise about this, because the single most common thing wrong with a story like mine is that the setup is too convenient, and this one is not convenient at all. It is just Friday. It was a pad-mounted unit, about 9 years old, and it went with a noise. The pier went to backup, and the backup came up correctly, which is the entire reason nothing worse happened, and then there were about 90 minutes of work involving a utilities crew, a duty electrician, an isolation, and a very careful conversation about what could and could not be energized before Monday. I was the regimental duty officer for engineering that week. That is not glamorous. It means that when something like that happens at 10 to 5 on a Friday, the telephone rings at me. So I was on the pier from 1710 to 1840. There is no version of that night where I skip it. The engineering duty officer does not send somebody else to a failed transformer at a fuel pier, and if you are looking for the place where the whole evening could have been avoided, it is not there. It was raining. Not dramatically, it was raining the way it rains on that coast in May, which is steadily and without any apparent intention of stopping. And I was in service dress blue because I had come from an office and I was going to a dinner, and there had been no window in the day to be anywhere else. By 1840, I was wet through the shoulders and down the back, my shoes were finished, and I had 40 minutes to get across the station, which I did not have. I got there at 1910, the community center, the building my battalion put a roof on in the 9th month. 411 people were expected. The foyer was full. There was a coat check to the left of the main doors with a queue at it and 2 civilians running it. And there was the noise a room makes when 400 people are finding their seats and have all had a drink. I came through the doors in a bridge coat. I want to walk through the uniform properly because the entire dispute afterwards was about it, and almost nobody outside the service will follow the argument otherwise. A bridge coat is the long navy overcoat. It is double-breasted and it comes below the knee, and this is the part that matters. The rank goes on the sleeve, and mine was under a soaked coat with the cuffs turned because I had been working. There is no rank on the front of a bridge coat. There is nothing on the front of a bridge coat at all. That is not an oversight in the design. It is a coat, and every officer in the Navy has stood in a foyer in one at some point and been nobody for as long as it took to get it off. Underneath it, I was in service dress blue with 3 gold stripes on each arm and a rack of ribbons and a CB Combat Warfare Specialist insignia, and every single thing that says who I am. None of it was visible. I want to be exact about that because the version that went around afterwards is that I was out of uniform. And I was not out of uniform. I was correctly and completely in uniform, wearing an authorized overcoat, wet. I stopped about 4 feet inside the doors to get my bearings. There was a group of officers to my right, 4 of them, standing with drinks in the way people stand when they have arrived early and are enjoying it. One of them was Captain Coralie Whitlock. I did not know that then. I knew that then, in the sense that I have been on that station for 4 years, and I had seen her face, and I did not know her name until Monday. 51 years old, surface warfare, a full grade above me, in dinner dress with miniature medals and a career's worth of them. She turned slightly, took her own coat off her arm, and held it out toward me without looking at my face. She said, "Coat check's that way, sweetheart." I said, "I'm a guest, ma'am." She still did not look up. She was half turned back toward her group, and the coat was still out. She said, "Then you're in the wrong building." Her table laughed. Not all 4 of them. 2 of them laughed, and one of them made a noise, and one of them did not. And I have thought about that one a great deal since. The one who did not was Lieutenant Commander Grant Pellerin, and he leaned in slightly and started to say something, and he got out 1 syllable of my name, and she talked straight over him about a car park. And 8 feet away, at the edge of the foyer, my own Command Master Chief was standing in his dinner dress with a glass in his hand. Lyle Ferreira had done 31 years by that May, and had seen everything a person can see in a foyer. He said, at completely normal volume inside about 4 seconds, "Ma'am, I would put that arm down." Not loudly, not a scene. A sentence in the ordinary voice of a senior chief in a room addressed to a captain he had never met in front of about 11 people. That is what actually happens. I want that in this account because I have heard versions of nights like this where a whole room freezes for 2 minutes and waits for a reveal, and rooms do not do that. Rooms have somebody in them who says something in 4 seconds, and it does not fix anything, and it matters enormously. Whitlock looked at him. Then she looked at me, properly, for the first time. And she did not put the arm down. I have gone over that a great deal, and I have concluded that it was not defiance. It was that she had committed to a reading of the room about 6 seconds earlier, and had not yet been given a reason to abandon it. And a woman like that does not abandon a position on the word of a chief. So there we were, a captain with her arm out and a coat hanging off it, a command master chief who had said his piece, and me, in a wet bridge coat, 4 feet inside the doors, deciding to say absolutely nothing at all. I have been asked since why I did not simply say my rank. It is 1 sentence, it takes 2 seconds, and it would have ended the whole thing in the foyer with nobody outside those 11 people ever knowing it happened. The honest answer is that it did not occur to me. Not as a decision I considered and rejected. It was not in the set of things available to me, standing there, and it took me until about the middle of June to work out that this was itself the problem and not a virtue. At 1913, the mess was called to order. A formal dinner in the Navy runs on a script that is about 200 years old and that almost nobody reads until the week they are told to run it. There is a president of the mess, and there is Mr. Vice, who is traditionally the most junior officer present, and Mr. Vice does the announcing. Mr. Vice is a real appointment with real duties, and the tradition is that the job is deliberately given to somebody who has no authority whatsoever, which is one of the better ideas the service has ever had, and which becomes important later in this account. That night, Mr. Vice was Lieutenant Junior Grade Nico Baptiste, 27 years old, 4 months into his first ship, and audibly terrified. He came to the microphone at the head of the room and read the words off a card. "Ladies and gentlemen of the mess, please rise for the guest of honor." And 400 people stood up. I need to tell you what that is, because if I let it stand unexamined, it becomes a different story than the one that happened. They were not standing for me. They were standing because a lieutenant junior grade with a card told them to. And the custom of the mess is that the assembly rises when the guest of honor is escorted in, and it does not matter one bit who the guest of honor is. It is furniture. It is a protocol that would have produced exactly the same 400 chairs going back if the guest of honor had been anybody at all. I knew that while it was happening. I have been in the Navy for 22 years, and I have stood up for people I had never heard of dozens of times, and I have never been able to explain to anybody, including myself, why knowing that made it worse rather than better. Perhaps this. A room that stands for you because you have earned it is a room that has made a judgment about you. A room that stands because a card told it to has made no judgment at all. And if you have spent 22 years in a trade whose success is invisible, being on the receiving end of 400 people performing a courtesy they do not mean is a very specific kind of nothing. I was the most looked at person in that building and the least seen simultaneously. For about 40 seconds. There is an escort that is also in the script. A lieutenant appeared at my left elbow, and I took my coat off and handed it to somebody, and I have no memory of who. And then I walked 22 meters from the foyer to the head table with 400 people on their feet on both sides, past the fourth table on the right. I did not look at her. That was not restraint, it was arithmetic. I had about 4 seconds of walking past that table, and there was no version of looking at her that ended anywhere good. But I was aware. You are aware of a thing 4 feet to your right whether you look or not. What I know about those 4 seconds I know from 3 people who told me afterwards, and their accounts agree, which is rare. She had already stood, because everybody had stood, and the coat was in her left hand, because she had not had anywhere to put it, and she was watching me come down the room, and Grant Pellerin, beside her, said the name he had tried to say in the foyer. And this time she let him finish it. Ferreira told me on the Monday that her face did one thing and one thing only, and it was not shock. He described it as the expression of somebody doing a rapid reassessment of a professional situation, which I think is exactly right, and which is the beginning of everything about Coralie Whitlock that makes this a more difficult story than the one I would have preferred to tell. She recovered inside about 6 seconds. I have this from Pellerin, months later, and he was not being disloyal, he was being accurate. 6 seconds is fast. I want to give her that. I have watched officers take a fortnight to recover from considerably less, and there is a version of me that admires the reflex even while I am the person it was deployed against. By the time I reached the head table, she had begun to explain it to the officer on her right. Ferreira, who was on the same side of the room, heard the shape of it, if not the words. The shape of it was the coat. She had a version already. That is what a very capable person does under pressure, and it is not a character flaw. It is a reflex. And hers had arrived at a defensible position before I had finished crossing the room. I sat down at the head table. The room sat down. The noise came back the way noise does. There were 9 of us at that table, and I knew 2 of them. Somebody put a bread roll in front of me. Somebody else asked whether the rain had been bad on the pier, which was a kind and completely ordinary question, and I answered it. And that was the first normal sentence anybody had said to me in about 11 minutes. Lieutenant Commander Ravenna Kilbride was 2 seats along, which I had not known, and which was the single best thing about the evening. She had been my executive officer for the last 14 months of the battalion. She had been on that station for the storm, and she had been in the water plant at 3 in the morning on the 4th day with a torch in her teeth. She did not say anything. She looked at me, and she looked at my shoulders, which were dark with rain right through the wool, and then she looked out at the room for a moment and then back at me. and she raised her eyebrows about a millimeter. That was the whole conversation. 14 months of command together buys you that. I had a fourth draft in my inside pocket that was slightly damp at the corner and about 2 hours to sit through before I had to stand up and read it, and a captain 4 tables out who had already finished constructing the version she was going to live in. I was called at about 2100. I stood up with the fourth draft in my hand, and I got as far as the lectern, and I put it face down on the wood and did not use it. That was not courage. It was that the fourth draft was about the importance of infrastructure, and I had spent 2 hours looking at 400 people in a room, and it had occurred to me, somewhere around the dessert, that not one of them knew where they were sitting. So I gave them the plain version instead. No structure, no opening line. I have given about 60 briefings a year for 22 years, and I have never once stood up without a structure, and I did it that night, and I would not recommend it to anybody. I said, I am going to talk about this building. Then I told them. The south wall, the roof, the date the temporary membrane went on, and the date the permanent went on. The company, the chief who ran it, the 19 people, the 11 days under, the 2 who fell out on the roof in June and came back the next morning. I told them about the water plant and the 9 days, and about the argument I had 4 times in the first week and won. And I told them that the reason they had been able to shower on the Wednesday after the storm was a decision made on a clipboard by people they had never met. I did not editorialize. I did not say anybody should be grateful. There is a version of that speech which is a rebuke, and it would have gone down extremely well, and it would have been the worst thing I have ever done, professionally. I said, near the end, you are sitting in a building my battalion rebuilt in the 9th month. I can give you the crew, if anybody wants it. That was not a challenge. I meant it flatly and literally. I had the list on my telephone, and I would have read it, and if anybody had asked, I would still be standing there. Then I sat down. There was no standing ovation. I want to record that, because a story like this wants one, and it did not happen, and what happened was better. What happened was that 400 people looked up. Nobody told them to. There was no line in what I said that instructed anybody to do anything. I mentioned a south wall, and about 11 people at the nearest table glanced at it, and then the table behind them noticed the glance, and it went from there. At the ceiling, at the south wall, at the beams. I watched it go across the room in a wave, table by table, the way a thing goes across a room, and about 200 people in dinner dress spent 40 seconds looking at a ceiling they had eaten under 9 times and never once seen. That is the single best moment of my professional life, and I did not do anything to cause it. I read out some dates. It lasted about 40 seconds, and then the room came back and somebody laughed at another table and the evening resumed. 40 seconds. I have chased that feeling 4 times since and not got it, and I have stopped trying because you cannot engineer it and the attempt is embarrassing. And I did not mention the foyer, not a word, not a glance in that direction, not an oblique line about assumptions or uniforms or what people look like when they come in wet. And I want to be completely clear that this was a decision and not an oversight. I had about 9 sentences available to me at that lectern that would have finished Coralie Whitlock in that room permanently. I had the floor, I had 400 witnesses, I had the moral position, and I had a captain sitting 4 tables out who had spent 2 hours telling people about a coat. I have thought about all 9 of those sentences since, repeatedly, at 2 a.m, on more than one occasion. I do not want any of them. Not because I am better than that, because every one of them turns the evening into a story about her, and that room had 11 months of my battalion's work in the roof over its head, and I was not going to trade that for 400 people going home talking about a foyer. That is the whole of my reasoning, and I have never found a hole in it, although I have looked. There was a builder second class at a back table called Odalys Ferrer. She was 24. She was there because the mess had put 6 petty officers at the back tables, which is a thing that wardroom does, and which I had never thought about before. She had been on the community center crew. She was 22 at the time, and she had been on that south wall in June, and she was one of the 19. I did not know she was in the room. I could not see the back tables from the lectern. The lighting is wrong, and there were 400 people in the way. Kilbride told me afterwards. She had been watching the room while I talked, the way an executive officer watches a room, and she said that when I got to the 9th month and the 19 people, a young woman at the back put her hand over her mouth and kept it there. By Monday, the version had reached the regiment. It moved fast and it moved cleanly, which is what happens when a version is plausible. The bad ones die over a weekend. The dangerous ones are the ones that could be true. Hers was this: that the guest of honor had arrived out of uniform. That in a dark foyer, in a long overcoat, with no visible insignia, an honest mistake had been made by somebody who was trying to hand a coat to what she reasonably believed was staff. That the whole thing had been blown out of proportion by people who enjoy that sort of thing. Every clause in that is defensible, and the load-bearing one is a lie. I was not out of uniform. There is no such thing as out of uniform when you are wearing an authorized overcoat over a service dress uniform, and a captain with 29 years in knows that. But it is a small lie, and it is the kind that is very expensive to correct, because to correct it, you have to be the person who is still talking about it. That is the whole economics of a story like that one. The version costs her nothing to maintain. Correcting it cost me my reputation as somebody who lets things go, which is the only reputation I have that has ever been worth anything. I did not correct it. I want to be honest about Coralie Whitlock because the easy thing here is to write her as a device, and she is not one. She was 51. She had been passed over for her first look at flag and was in the window where a captain either goes up or finishes. She was, by every account I have ever heard, including from people who dislike her, extremely good at her job. Her ship had been the best ship in the group 2 years running, and that is not luck. And she had spent a career being sharper than everybody in the room, because that is what it had taken to stay in it, and 30 years of that does something to a person that I am not going to pretend I fully understand from the outside. Pellerin said it to me in June, and he said it carefully because he was in an impossible position and had been all along. He said, "Ma'am, she is not a bad officer. That is the part nobody wants." He is right, and it is the part nobody wants. It would be much easier if she were bad at her job. She was not. She was excellent at her job, and she looked at a wet woman in a foyer and decided in about a second and a half what she was. And both of those things are true about the same person, and I have not got a tidy way to hold them together. Ferreira wanted to take it up. He would have been within his rights, and he would have been effective. A command master chief with 31 years who can name 9 witnesses is not somebody a captain's version survives contact with. He came and found me on the Tuesday. 31 years, command master chief, and about as angry as I have ever seen him, which in his case means he was very slightly more precise than usual. He said, "There were 11 people in that foyer, ma'am. I can name 9 of them." I said, "No," he said, "you are going to let it stand." And I said, "I am going to let it be somebody else's." He did not like that. He is entitled not to like it. He stood there for a moment, and then he said, "Yes, ma'am." In the specific way that means he was going to think about it, and he left. I owe him a straight account of why, and here it is, and it is not forgiveness. It is that a complaint from me would have been about me. Every fact in it would have been correct, and every person reading it would have been reading a document written by the wronged party, and it would have gone into a process that takes 4 months and produces a paragraph. And there were 9 other people in that foyer, and 8 of them outranked nobody, and one of them was a lieutenant commander at her own table. If it was going to be anything, it was going to have to come from them. That is not strategy. That is just how a thing has to work if it is going to mean anything at all. The conversation that mattered was with Kilbride in a car park on the Thursday. She asked me straight out whether I was all right, which nobody else had, because everybody else had been asking whether I was going to do something. And I told her the thing I had worked out on the Wednesday and did not want to have worked out. I said she thought I was staff, and I was not offended by that. It took me 4 days to understand that this is the worst part. Kilbride said, "Say the rest of it." I said, "I have been in this Navy for 22 years, and I do not expect to be recognized, not by anybody outside my own community. I have never expected it. I thought that was health." She waited. I said, "It is not health. It is that I taught an entire station how to look past me, and then I was surprised when one of them did it to my face." She did not argue with me, which I had wanted her to. She stood in a car park with her keys in her hand and let that sit for a while. And then she said, "That is about half right, ma'am," and got in her car, and she has never told me which half. The thing that actually happened in June, and I had nothing to do with any of it. Nico Baptiste wrote a paragraph. He was 27. He was a lieutenant junior grade with 4 months on a ship, and he had been Mr. Vice, because Mr. Vice is always the most junior officer present, and he had been standing at a microphone 11 feet away from the foyer when the whole thing happened. Every mess has a standing set of arrangements. Ours ran to 9 pages and covered dress, seating, the toasts, the smoking lamp, and the order of the courses. It said nothing at all about how a guest of honor arrives. So there is now a paragraph in it. He drafted it. He took it to the president of the mess, who is a captain, which took a quantity of nerve that I do not think he will ever be given credit for. It says, in substance, that the guest of honor is met at the entrance by the president of the mess or a designated escort from the moment of arrival, and that the escort remains with the guest until the head table is seated. 2 sentences, entirely procedural. It solves the problem completely by removing the foyer from the equation, which is the only thing that was ever going to solve it, because you cannot instruct 400 people to be better at recognizing people. My name is nowhere in it. It went up in June, and it was signed, and it will outlive everybody involved, and in 2040, nobody reading it will have the faintest idea why it is there. I have never thanked him for it. I thought about it for about a week and decided against, because a commander thanking a lieutenant junior grade for a paragraph makes the paragraph about the foyer, and at the moment it is just a rule about escorts. That is what an institutional fix looks like. It is boring. It is 2 sentences of furniture, written by the most junior officer in the room, and it is worth more than any complaint I could have filed. A complaint disciplines one person. A paragraph in a standing instruction disciplines the situation permanently for everybody who comes after, including the people it will one day protect from somebody who has not been born yet. The other thing I know 1 fact about and nothing else. A fitness report was written by somebody who was in that foyer, about somebody else who was in that foyer, and it was not written by me, and it did not come from my chain of command, and it went where those go. I heard the fact of it in late June from Ferreira, who heard it the way command master chiefs hear things. I do not know what it says. I do not know whether it says anything at all, in the sense that a fitness report is a very carefully constructed document, and the whole art of it is what is not there. I did not ask. I want to record that I wanted to. I wanted to badly for about a fortnight, and I have got a dozen ways to have found out and did not use one of them, and my reason is not high-minded. My reason is that I know exactly what I am like, and the day I find out is the day this becomes a thing I am following, and a thing you follow is a thing you are still inside. The regiment asked for the speech in writing. Somebody had mentioned it upward, and there was interest in putting it in a newsletter, and a captain on the staff asked me for a copy. I did not have one. The 4th draft was face down on a lectern and bore no relationship at all to what I had said. So I sent them the crew list instead. I did not do that to make a point, although I can see how it reads. I did it because they had asked me for the speech, and the speech had been the crew list. That was the content. Everything else was dates around the names. All of it. Every name from the reconstruction, not just the community center company, going back to the assessment walk in August of 2023. 140 names with rates in the order they had come onto the job. I did not send a note with it. There was no note to send. In the 2nd week of June, it went up on a board in the lobby of the community center. Somebody in Public Works did it properly, mounted and framed on the wall on the left as you come in from the car park at about eye height. My father found out from a newsletter that a man he served with in 1978 still forwards him. He called me on a Sunday. He is not a man who calls. He said, "There is a board." I said there was. He was quiet for a bit, in the way he is, and then he said the second of the 2 sentences he has said about the trade in my entire life. He said, "Names on a wall is the whole job, V. That is the only monument any of us get." And then he asked me about the car, and we talked about the car for 11 minutes, and that was the end of it. Coralie Whitlock and I have never spoken. We have been in the same building twice since the 22nd of May. The first time was a briefing in early June, with about 30 people in it, and we were never within 20 feet of each other, and I'm not certain she knew I was there. The second time was a passageway in July. She was coming one way and I was coming the other, and there were perhaps 11 feet between us and nobody else in it, and we both had about 4 seconds of warning. Neither of us did anything. Not hostility. Nothing. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and we both kept walking at exactly the pace we had been walking, and that is the last time the 2 of us have been in a room together, and I expect it will remain so. I have been asked twice, by the only two people I have told this to in full, whether I forgive her. It is the wrong question, and I have stopped being polite about saying so. Forgiveness is a transaction, and it takes two parties. She has never spoken to me. She did not apologize on the night, or in the following week, or at any point in 9 weeks, and by every account she tells it as a misunderstanding about an overcoat. There's nobody there to forgive. There's only a version of events moving around a station with my name in it and somebody else's hand on it. What is available instead is a decision about how much of my week she gets, and I made mine in about the second week of June, and it holds most of the time. Most of the time is the honest phrasing. It does not hold at 4 a.m, and it does not hold in a passageway with 11 feet in it. What it holds through is the working day, which is about 80% of my life, and 80% is a good result for a decision you make about a person. The thing that actually changed me was Ferrer. She asked to talk to me in late June. She went through her chief, who went to Ferreira, who came to me, which is 4 steps for a 24-year-old, to ask a commander a question, and which tells you everything about how far apart we sit. She came to my office. She stood up the whole time, and I did not tell her to sit down because I could see it would not help. She said, "Ma'am, how do you get people to look at the work?" She had rehearsed it. You can always tell. It came out slightly too flat and slightly too fast, the way a sentence does when somebody has said it to themselves in a corridor. That is the question. That is the entire question of my community asked by somebody who has been in it 2.5 years, and I have been in it 22, and I did not have a good answer ready. I gave her the honest one first because she was going to find it out anyway, and it is better coming from somebody who is not bitter about it. I said, "Mostly you do not." Then I gave her the other one. I said, "Put the names up, every time, not yours, theirs. On the completion, on the record, out loud if you are standing anywhere near a microphone, every time whether or not it is noticed, for the whole of your career." She said, "Does that work, ma'am?" I said, "It worked on 400 people in May, and I had to be a lieutenant colonel's worth of angry at a lectern to do it once." Which is not true. I was not angry at all. But it was the sentence that landed, and I have decided not to correct it. So I do that now. At every completion, every handover, every closeout, I read the crew into the record by name. Out loud, whether there is anybody in the room or not. It takes about 4 minutes, and it is faintly ridiculous, and nobody has ever asked me to do it. I started in July, and I am not going to stop. And in the first week of July, a job came up on the regimental list. An 18-month reconstruction on the east side. Utilities, foundations, 3 buildings, and a schedule that runs through 2 wet seasons. There is no ceremony attached to it at any point. There is no ribbon at the end. It is the single least visible thing on that list, and about 4 people wanted it. I asked for it. Kilbride telephoned when she saw the list. She wanted to know whether I had lost my mind or was making a point, and I told her neither, and she did not believe me for about a fortnight. It is a good job. That is the entire reason. It is 18 months of hard, sequenced, technically interesting work with a crew I know, and nobody is going to come and look at it. And after 22 years, I have finally stopped experiencing that second clause as a cost. The board is still in the lobby. 140 names, mounted and framed, on the left as you come in from the car park. Something has happened to it that nobody planned and that nobody controls. People have started adding to it. Not on the board. Around it. There is a corkboard on the adjacent wall that used to have notices on it, and it now has about 30 index cards pinned to it, and every one of them is a crew. A public works crew that did the water main on the North Road in 2019. Somebody's father's company from a job in the 1990s. A galley refit. A crew of 6 who did a roof on a chapel in 2015 that nobody has ever mentioned in any document anywhere. Handwritten, unofficial. Nobody has asked permission for any of it, and I am fairly sure that if anybody in facilities noticed it properly, they would have to take it down, and so far, nobody in facilities has noticed it properly. I have been to look at it 4 times. I have never added anything to it, and I am not going to. It is not mine. That is the entire reason. The moment a commander pins a card to that corkboard, it becomes an official thing with an owner, and an official thing with an owner gets a policy, and a policy gets it taken down inside a year. The best things on a naval station are the ones nobody has noticed hard enough to regulate. Lyle Ferreira retires in September, 31 years. He came into my office at the end of a working day in the second week of July about a materials schedule, and we did the materials schedule, and then he stood in the doorway the way he does when there is one more thing. He said, "Ma'am, 2008, the work package." I said I remembered. He said, "You read the whole thing." I said I had, and that there had been 4 things wrong with it, and that he had known about all 4. He said, 6 things wrong with it. Then he said, "You understood it, ma'am?" And he went home. 4 words. I wrote them down that evening in the same notebook I use for site work, which is not a sentimental object, and they are on a page between a concrete pour schedule and a list of gate access requests. Which brings me back to a slab on the east side of the station at 6:20 on a Tuesday morning in July. 19 people, 2 pumps, a pour that had been rescheduled twice for weather and that had a 4-hour window in it and was going to be tight. There is a particular quality to a site at 6:20 in the morning before a pour. Everything is staged and nothing has started. The forms are in, the steel is tied and inspected, the trucks are lining up on the access road, and there is about 10 minutes where 19 people stand around drinking coffee and the whole thing is still perfect. I was standing on the edge of the formwork with a notebook, and I wrote 19 names down before anybody touched anything, because that is what I do now. 18 months of that ahead of me. Utilities, foundations, 3 buildings, 2 wet seasons, and no ribbon at the end of any of it. I was happier at 6:20 on that Tuesday than I have been in about 2 years, and I am aware of how that reads, and it is true anyway. So here is what I have got. 400 people stood up for me in May. It meant nothing. I want to be exact because this is the whole thing. It meant nothing because a 27-year-old with a card told them to, and the custom of the mess is that the room rises, and they would have stood for anybody, and they did not know who I was when they stood, and about half of them did not know when they sat back down. In June, 140 names went on a board in a lobby, and I would guess that 9 people have ever stopped and read it. I know which one of those 2 I would keep, and it is not close. The room standing was about protocol. The board is about 140 people who were on a roof in June, and about 6 of whom are still on that station, and one of whom is a builder second class who now reads names into a record because I told her to. If you do work that only shows when it fails, and a lot of people do, then nobody's coming to tell you that it mattered. That is not a thing that is going to happen. The building works, and the water runs, and the room stays dry, and the whole measure of your success is that nobody has had a single thought about you all year. And the standing ovation is not the thing anyway. I have had the standing ovation. It was 400 people, and it lasted about 90 seconds, and it was furniture. Put the names up, say them out loud, write them into the record, do it at the completion, do it at the handover, do it when there is nobody in the room to hear you, and do it for the people who did the work rather than the person who signed for it. That is the whole of what I have got, and I got it at 44. And it took a captain holding out a coat in a foyer to teach it to me, which I do not think she would find funny, and which I have decided is not her business. That's the whole of it. A failed transformer on a fuel pier, a wet overcoat, 400 people getting to their feet because a 27-year-old with a card told them to, and 140 names on a board in a lobby that about 9 people have ever stopped to read. I never spoke to her again. There was no apology and no conversation, and there is not going to be one. And I have made my peace with that too, which took longer. What I would genuinely like to know is what you would have done at that lectern, because I had about 9 sentences available to me that would have finished her in front of 400 people, and I did not use any of them. Would you have? And if you do work that only gets noticed when it fails, what would it have taken for somebody to see it? Tell me in the comments. I do read them. And if this one hit home, hit subscribe.